Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Today we are going to continue our discussion on the Civil War, and today we are going to begin by talking about the creation and the birth of the Confederate States of America. In February 1861, the 7 seceding states established the Confederate States of America. They then proceeded to frame a constitution for the new government. The Confederate Constitution closely resembled the U.S. Constitution. However, it stressed the independence of each state and implied that states had the right to secede. It also guaranteed the protection of slavery. To win the support of Britain and France, which adamantly opposed the slave trade, it prohibited importing new slaves from other countries. Not all Southerners backed the Confederacy. Some large planters with economic ties to the North still hoped for a compromise. So too did many small farmers with no vested interest in slavery. To gain the loyalty of such citizens, the Confederacy chose former Mississippi Senator Jefferson Davis as their president. So, of the Confederate States of America, the Confederate president, is a man by the name of Jefferson Davis. He was a senator from Mississippi. The two sides failed to compromise. Some politicians sought a final compromise. Kentucky Senator John Crittenden proposed a constitutional amendment allowing slavery in Western territories south of the Missouri Compromise line. He also called for federal funds to reimburse slaveholders for unreturned fugitives. Lincoln, now president-elect, warned that Crittenden's plan would lose us everything we gained by the election. A narrow margin of senators voted down this Crittenden compromise. President Buchanan, in his last few weeks in office, told Congress that he had no authority to prevent secession. He lamented the breakup of the Union and sympathized with the South's concerns, but he made no serious effort to resolve the crisis. Other pacifying attempts also failed. A secret peace convention held in Washington, which drew delegates from the border states as well as the North and South, failed to reach a compromise that could save the Union. So people are trying to work out some sort of an agreement here, and nothing is working out. Lincoln appeals to the South. Amid this turmoil, the new president took office. Lincoln had no illusions about the challenge he faced. He confronted a task he feared greater than that which rested upon President George Washington. Lincoln was sworn in as president on March 4, 1861. In his inaugural address, he took a firm but conciliatory tone toward the South. I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists, he began. But he did intend to preserve the Union. No state, upon its own mere action, can lawfully get out of the Union, he said. Still, he would avoid violence. There would be no war, he pledged, unless the South started it. He concluded with an appeal to the South to live in peace. So Lincoln is still trying to get the South to come back. He's even saying that he's not going to do anything about slavery, and that he is not going to fight the South unless they start it. So he is trying to get the Union back together. Alright, here's a quote from Abraham Lincoln. "We are not enemies but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature." Abraham Lincoln, March 4th, 1861. So here he's saying that we can still get back together. We can still make this work. We can join together and form this union that has been around for many years. So he's trying to get people together. He's trying to get the country back together, but it's not going to work. Conflict erupts over federal forts and arsenals. When the southern states seceded, they seized the federal forts and arsenals within their borders. Only 4 forts remained in Union hands. The most important of these was Fort Sumter, which guarded the harbor at Charleston, South Carolina. In January 1861, President Buchanan tried to send troops and supplies to the fort, but the unarmed supply ships sailed away when Confederate guns fired on it. Upon taking office, Lincoln had decided whether to take the risk required to hold on to these forts or yield to Confederate demands that they be surrendered. By April, the troops at the fort desperately needed food and supplies. Lincoln, who still hoped to bring back the South without bloodshed, faced a dilemma. Should he try to resupply the fort, or should he let the Confederates take it? Lincoln struggled to make a decision. During his inaugural address, he had promised Southerners that the government will not assail you, but as president he was sworn to defend the property of the United States. A wrong move could touch off a war. At last, trying to steer a middle course, Lincoln notified South Carolina that he was sending supplies, food only, no arms, to the fort. So, he's going to send food because the troops that are stationed in this fort are starving. They don't have any food left. So he notifies South Carolina, and he's like, I'm sending them supplies. It's just food. It's not going to be weapons. And sends it along. We're going to see what happens. The Confederacy attacks Fort Sumter. South Carolinians were suspicious of Lincoln's motives and ordered the Fort Sumter garrison to surrender to the Confederacy. When the Union troops refused, the Confederates fired on the fort. The Union troops eventually ran out of ammunition, forcing the commander to surrender. Northerners responded to the attack on Fort Sumter with shock and anger. A few days later, on April 15th, President Lincoln declared that insurrection existed and called for 75,000 volunteers to fight against the Confederacy. So, the Confederates attacked Fort Sumter, and this was essentially the spark that started it all. Lincoln declared that this was insurrection, and he's calling for 75,000 volunteers to fight the Confederacy. The South responded just as strongly. At the outbreak of hostilities, the states of Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina joined the Confederacy. As in the North, the South raised troops quickly and struggled to equip and train them before sending them into battle. Both sides predicted a short skirmish with victory only a few days or months away. These predictions were unfounded. Americans faced years of terrible suffering before the fighting that had begun at Fort Sumter finally ended. So at the beginning of all this, both the North and the South thought, oh well, this is going to be a skirmish, it'll last like a few days, a few weeks maybe, and then we can get back to business as usual. They didn't realize that this was going to be a years-long conflict. Okay, as to kind of summarize everything that we've seen so far, let's look at this timeline. November 1860, Abraham Lincoln is elected president. Not 2 months later, on December 20th, 1860, South Carolina secedes from the Union. He's elected in November. The next month, South Carolina secedes. Between January 9th and February 1st, 1861, 6 more southern states secede. So now there's 7 states in the Confederacy. February 1861, President James Buchanan bars states from seceding, but does not approve military force. So James Buchanan makes it illegal for states to secede, but he doesn't do anything to try to bring the other states back. Just a few days later, the Confederate States of America forms. 9 days later, Jefferson Davis becomes president of the Confederate States. In March of 1861, Lincoln is inaugurated as president. So Lincoln is now president. Meaning that as soon as Lincoln was in office, the Confederacy already existed. There was not a period of time where Lincoln was president where he had the entire country under one rule. So he had a hard situation right from the get-go. April to June of 1861, 4 additional states secede from the Union. And then April 12th, Confederate soldiers attack Fort Sumter, beginning the Civil War. So this is where the war is starting. You know, we've had a lot of things leading up to it, but this is the first actual guns being fired battle of the Civil War. 3 days later, April 15th, Lincoln summoned 75,000 Union volunteers to fight the Confederacy. So, this is when Lincoln starts building an army to go against the Confederacy. Resources and strategies. In 1861, the long, bitter dispute over slavery and states' rights erupted into war. The first shots at Fort Sumter set the stage for a long, costly struggle. At stake was the survival of the United States. Here's a graphic that shows, the one thing that I wanted to show you was the military resources of the Union versus the Confederacy. Each person outline is 10,000 troops. So the Union has 11. So that's 110,000 troops, whereas the Confederacy has 3.5. Not great. And then there's also a similar sort of graph there for the Navy. The Union's advantages. The North enjoyed a tremendous advantage in population. Nearly 21 million people had lived in the states that stayed in the Union. By contrast, the Confederacy had a population of only 9 million, of whom 3.5 million were enslaved African Americans. The industrialized North was far better prepared to wage war than the agrarian South. Most of the nation's coal and iron came from the Union mines, and the vast West was a source of gold, silver, and other resources. The densely populated urban areas of the Northeast supported a wide variety of manufacturing. With mechanized factories and a steady flow of European immigrants seeking work, the Union could produce more ammunition, arms, uniforms, medical supplies, and railroad cars than the Confederacy could. In addition, the Union had a larger railroad network for moving troops and materials. So the Union's going to have a lot of advantages here. They've got a lot of things going for them that are making it look like this struggle is not going to last very long. The Union had a small but well-organized navy. By the spring of 1861, the Union had about 40 seaworthy vessels, with more under construction. By the end of 1861, the North had more than 250 vessels. The South had only about 20 ships when the war broke out, leaving it vulnerable to a naval blockade, in which Union ships prevented merchant vessels from entering or leaving the South's few good ports, thereby crippling Southern trade. Finally, while the Confederate government was new and inexperienced, the North had an established government and an outstanding leader in Abraham Lincoln. Not everyone recognized this fact at the outset of the war, but Lincoln's leadership would prove invaluable to the Union cause. Union warships maintained blockades of southern waterways, such as this ship blocking the James River near the coast of Virginia. Now, what a blockade is whenever ships will essentially block off ports. And that is how the South got a lot of their resources, especially things that came from other countries. These other country ships would sail in and then they would land at the ports in the South and then trade their goods. Well, the North is going to prevent those supplies from getting there, and hoping that that kind of pressure will help bring the South back to the country. The Confederacy's advantages. Still, the North did have some distinct weaknesses compared to the South. One of the Confederacy's advantages was psychological. Many Northerners were willing to let the slaveholding South go. To them, preserving the Union was not worth killing and dying for. But the Confederacy was fighting for survival. Although there were pockets of pro-Union feeling in places such as Western Virginia, most Southern whites believed passionately in the Confederate cause. Even those who were not slaveholders resented what they saw as Northern efforts to dominate them. When the war began, the regular U.S. Army, consisting of professional soldiers, numbered only about 16,000 men, some of whom became Confederates. Lincoln called for 75,000 new recruits and received an enthusiastic response, with 100,000 men volunteering from the northern states. However, these new recruits signed on for 3 months of service, hardly long enough to form an efficient fighting team. The South faced similar challenges in assembling its armies, but it had a strong military tradition and tactical leaders like Virginia's Robert E. Lee. Lee, who had an outstanding record in the United States Army, was actually opposed secession and slavery, yet he turned down an offer to command Union forces. Robert E. Lee was a brilliant tactician. He had a good history with the military, and actually, whenever all of this first started, Robert E. Lee was Lincoln's choice to lead the Union Army. That's how highly Lincoln regarded Robert E. Lee. As far as his military strategy knowledge and his experience as a soldier, Lincoln held Robert E. Lee in high regard, and Robert E. Lee was Lincoln's first choice to lead the Union Army against the Confederacy. But Robert E. Lee is going to turn against the Union and join the Confederacy. With all my devotion to the Union and the feeling of loyalty and duty of an American citizen, I have not been able to make up my mind to raise my hand against my relatives, my children, my home. I have therefore resigned my commission in the Army and save in defense of my native state. I hope I may never be called upon to draw my sword. Robert E. Lee, letter to his sister, April 20th, 1861. Confederate advantages. Lee did accept command of this Confederate Army and provided the South with inspiring military leadership throughout the war. The North struggled to find a commander of such caliber. Finally, the Confederacy had a number of strategic advantages. It did not need to conquer the North, it simply had to avoid defeat. Expecting that in time the North would give up the effort, by and large, Southern forces would be fighting a defensive war on familiar, friendly ground, while Northern forces had to fight an offensive war in enemy territory. Union troops and supplies had to travel farther to reach the field of battle. The North also had to devote precious military resources to defending Washington, D.C. Only the Potomac River separated the Union capital from Confederate Virginia. Yeah, there was not a lot of territory between where the Confederacy was and where Washington, D.C. was. It's actually very close. So that really made the North kind of in a bad spot, because you don't want to lose your nation's capital in a war, and having it just be right across a river from where your enemies live could be a very dangerous place to be in. The Confederacy counts on time and foreign aid. As the two sides prepared for war, Union and Confederate leaders contemplated their goals and how they might go about meeting them. While Northerners hoped for a quick victory, Southern strategists planned for a prolonged war. The strategy of the Confederacy had two main thrusts. Militarily, the South hoped to preserve its small armies while doing enough damage to erode the Union's will to fight. Politically, it hoped to win formal recognition from Britain and France. Trade with these nations was crucial to the South, since the supply of manufactured goods from the North was now cut off. By the same token, the European textile industry was dependent on Southern cotton. Confederate leaders reasoned that if the war dragged on, French and British mills would run out of raw cotton. Therefore, these countries might be willing to provide military aid to the South. So now the North is starting to get nervous about these business ties that the South has to these other countries, and they're afraid that these other countries may come and interfere and give the South aid. So they're trying to prevent that. The Union plans its attack. The initial Union strategy was a two-part plan devised by General Winfield Scott, a Virginia-born hero of the Mexican-American War and the commander of all U.S. forces in 1861. First, the Union would blockade Southern ports, starving the South of income and supplies. Then Union forces would drive southward along the Mississippi River. Union control of the Mississippi would split the Confederacy in two, fatally weakening it. Scott's plan came to be known as the Anaconda Plan, after a type of snake that coils around its prey and squeezes it to death. Some anti-slavery congressmen thought Scott's plan was too timid. They favored a massive military campaign that would quickly free the slaves across the South. Lincoln also hoped that a decisive victory over rebel forces massed in northern Virginia and around Richmond might lead the Confederacy to negotiate an end to the crisis. Despite such criticism and concentration on winning quickly, the Anaconda Plan remained central to the Union war strategy. Lincoln appeases the border states. The Union also faced a tricky political question: how to prevent the secession of Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware, and Maryland. Although these border states allowed slavery, they had not joined the Confederacy. Lincoln knew that if they chose to secede, the Union could be lost. To reduce this threat, the president insisted that his only goal was to save the Union. In his first inaugural address, he announced, "I believe I have no lawful right to free the slaves, and I have no inclination to do so." Although Lincoln's stand troubled abolitionists, he did succeed in keeping the border states loyal to the Union. Okay guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you have any questions, you know how to get a hold of me. I hope everybody's having a great day, and I'll see you again real soon. Bye.